Okay, Act 1, Scene 4. Probably not anybody's favorite scene from the whole play, the shortest of the five scenes in Act 1, at not even 100 lines. And as far as stuff that gets cut in production, certainly in film versions, that except for the unexpurgated Kenneth Branagh version from '96, that famously doesn't cut anything. Most film versions cut quite a bit. And as far as scenes that find themselves most often on the chopping block go, Act 1, Scene 4 is up there. Many film versions cut virtually all of it, with the exception, of course, of the most famous line from it, Marcellus's famous "Something is rotten in the state of Denmark," the third to last line of the scene. And yet other film versions do regard it as important, I suppose, most notably the Laurence Olivier version from back in the 40s, the only in fact, film of any Shakespeare play ever to win the Oscar for Best Picture thus far, begins by putting a speech from this scene, printed right up on the screen, which I was happy to see, as I've always regarded that particular speech, which we'll talk about here in a minute, as more important, I think, than most do. But really, 1.4 is another ghost tease. Dramatically, it is here to make us even more anxious and curious to find out what the ghost has to say in Act 1.5 when it finally talks. What we have going on here is Hamlet and the guys hanging out on the battlements, shooting the breeze about whatever, really, when suddenly the ghost swoops in, beckons to Hamlet to follow it. The other guys try and hold him back. Hamlet insists and runs off after the ghost. And in terms of stuff that happens, in terms of a series of events, that's the entire scene. But there are a few things that are spoken in the course of this series of events that our attention deserves to be drawn to. As they're hanging out, waiting for the clock to strike midnight, or debating whether it already has, in lines 3 and 4, they hear cannons going off in the distance. Horatio asks, "What does this mean, my lord?" And Hamlet explains, "The king doth wake tonight and takes his rouse, keeps wassail in the swaggering upspring reels, and as he drains his draughts of Rhenish down, the kettle drum and trumpet thus bray out the triumph of his pledge." In other words, what's going on in the distance is that king's rouse stuff we heard Claudius talking about just before his exit in Act 1, Scene 2, that in order to celebrate the fact that Hamlet is going to stay at the castle instead of going back to college, Claudius is going to get drunk that night. Seems like a minor thing to celebrate, but any excuse for a drink with this guy, it seems. And whenever he does a shot or a draught of Rhenish or whatever he's drinking, the cannons go off. Horatio, confused, asks, "Is it a custom?" To which Hamlet responds, "I, marry, ist, but to my mind, though I am native here into the manor born, it is a custom more honored in the breach than the observance." In other words, yes, it is a custom, but even though I grew up around it and it should seem normal to me, I think it's ridiculous and wish Danish kings would stop doing this. This is where we get the expression "to the manor born," and that is up there as far as quotes from Shakespeare that people often get wrong. You sometimes hear people use that expression as if it is manor, to the manor born, an expression meaning rich or privileged, as though it's a manor house. But actually, manor, manor houses, did not exist in Shakespeare's time. This is a term more relevant to the work of Jane Austen 200 years later. What Hamlet is saying is to the manor, manner, born, meaning to the custom, to the habit born. I'm from Denmark. Heck, I'm the Prince of Denmark. I grew up here in Elsinore Castle. The kings of Denmark have always done this, so it should seem normal to me, but it doesn't. It would behoove us to give it up. Now, this raises, as so much stuff that this Hamlet guy says does, an interesting question about that whole nature versus nurture debate that would eventually become such a big deal in philosophy and sociology. Right? There are many people today. I suppose the majority view today is what's called social constructionism, right? As opposed to biological determinism, right? The idea that most of your personality is just stuff that society teaches you after you're born, rather than you being born with a particular personality. But Hamlet's point here serves to remind us that, it can't all be social constructionism, because if all our opinions are just what society teaches us is okay or not okay, or normal or not normal after we're born, then it wouldn't be possible for anybody to disagree with their society, or to disagree with the majority view in their society. And yet many people do. In fact, probably everybody disagrees with the majority opinion in their society about at least one or two things, right? So if our opinions and our beliefs are all just what society teaches us after we're born, where do those ideas come from? The ideas where we disagree with society. This is the question Shakespeare is raising here, and it's the point is well taken. Hamlet continues, this heavy-headed revel east and west makes us traduced and taxed of other nations. They clep us drunkards and with swinish phrase soil our addition. In other words, other countries make fun of us about this custom where the king gets drunk and they shoot off cannons. And indeed, it takes from our achievements, though performed at height, the pith and marrow of our attribute. So oft it chances in particular men, that for some vicious mole of nature in them, as in their birth, wherein they are not guilty, since nature cannot choose his origin, by their o'ergrowth of some complexion oft breaking down the pales and forts of reason, or by some habit that too much o'erleavens the form of plausive manners, that these men, carrying, I say, the stamp of one defect, being nature's livery or fortune's star, his virtues else be they as pure as grace, as infinite as man may undergo, shall, in the general censure, take corruption from that particular fault. The dram of evil doth all the noble substance of a doubt to his own scandal. Now, I quoted that in full because I think it's worth quoting in full. Hamlet starts off talking about countries, right? If there's a negative stereotype about people from a particular country, it will be the only thing that people from other countries talk about. And he then transitions into saying, it works that way for individual humans too. So oft it chances in particular men, that for some vicious mole of nature in them, etc. In other words, even if you're a terrific guy or gal otherwise, a terrific person otherwise, right? Virtues else be they as pure as grace. Those virtues shall in the general censure take corruption from that particular fault. In other words, if there's one bad thing about you, that's all anybody is going to talk about, and all the good stuff about you won't matter. The dram of evil, right? The one drop of bad stuff doth all the noble substance of a doubt to his own scandal, or the one drop of bad in you will shade or color in or negatively affect all the good things about you. Now, as soon as Hamlet is finished saying this, this seeming tangent he goes off on in response to the king's rows and the cannons going off in the distance, the ghost enters. And Horatio exclaims, "Look, my lord, it comes!" And Hamlet, amazed, begins to address what certainly appears to be his father's ghost, with the angels and ministers of grace defend us speech. Now, the high drama of this, immediately causes to blink out of our minds the speech Hamlet had just made about the dram of evil doing all the noble substance of a doubt to his own scandal. So it's a thing Shakespeare writes seemingly uh, to make us immediately forget. Um, Now, that makes me want to go back and look more closely at what it is that we're being distracted from here. And it is, in my opinion, one of the play's more brilliant, as we would say today, Easter eggs, sort of, hidden jokes. Now, when Hamlet talks about this, right, this idea that if you're an otherwise admirable person, but there's one bad thing about you, that's all anybody's going to talk about. Now that sounds a lot like what concept that we all remember from English class, probably from when we were reading something by Shakespeare in English class. The tragic flaw, right, or the hamartia, if you want to be fancy, right? The idea that the main character of a tragedy, traditionally, going all the way back to ancient Greece and Rome, is someone who is a hero at the beginning, right? Better than everybody else in most ways or in other ways, but there's this one bad thing about them, and through a slow series of decisions that all seemed perfectly logical at the time, by the end, it brings about their undoing. Um, and many of the times that you wrote papers about Shakespeare plays in school, they probably dealt with this concept of the tragic flaw. For most of Shakespeare's most famous tragedies, we can even list them. Right, Othello's is jealousy, Caesar's is pride, Macbeth's is ambition, etc. So this seems to me to be a another one of those inside baseball or inside drama Easter eggs about plays and protagonists and playwriting that Shakespeare is dropping into this play in particular. Here we have the main character of a tragedy, who presumably therefore has a tragic flaw, making a speech about the concept of the tragic flaw. Um, Now, that for people who notice it gets us thinking. Oh, right, this guy's the main character of a tragedy, so he probably has one of those. I wonder what it's going to turn out to be. Now, Shakespeare is making us ask that so that he can more effectively frustrate us. Seemingly, I think, knowing that this time the question of the tragic flaw is not going to be so simple. Right, it's not going to be as easy to answer as Othello's is jealousy. Right, people for over 4 centuries now have been arguing about exactly what Hamlet's tragic flaw is. Certainly there's something is wrong with this guy. But it may not be something that we have that we can answer in a single word. An answer that's as simple as jealousy or pride or ambition. Um, Shakespeare. This is one of the parts of the play for me where Shakespeare knows that what he's doing is just way more complex, even by his own very high standards, than what he is normally doing, and he's tossing out clues to us about it. Anyway, the next speech, "Angels and Ministers of Grace Defend Us," is certainly lyrically gorgeous, but also as far as things that one reads aloud. And I do recommend doing that if you're, for school or whatever, you've been assigned some Shakespeare and you're trying to read it at home. You'd be amazed how much more sense it makes when you say it out loud, and because you feel it as well as just staring at the words. One thing I notice about this speech. Let me not burst in ignorance, but tell why thy canonized bones, hearsed in death, have burst their cerements, why the sepulchre wherein we saw thee quietly inurned hath oped his ponderous and marble jaws to cast thee up again. What may this mean, that thou, dead corse, again in complete steel, revisits thus the glimpses of the moon, making night hideous, and we fools of nature so horridly to shake our disposition with thoughts beyond the reaches of our souls? Is that it's hard to say. Not just in terms of figuring out what it means, but actually, like, it makes your jaw hurt. It's practically a tongue twister. And I think that when writing the part of Prince Hamlet, Shakespeare's always very, very attuned to sound in addition to meaning, but especially when writing Hamlet's lines, how uh, how much the stuff Hamlet says either flows, as so many of his soliloquies do, versus seems, gummed up or difficult in the mouth, depending on his mood. Both here and I think even more, especially during the closet scene, when Hamlet is yelling at his mom, the big fight between Hamlet and his mom in Act 3, Scene 4. I think in terms of being hard on the jaw, tongue twistery, difficult to say. It's this speech, Angels and Ministers of Grace, and some stuff that he says to his mom in 3.4 that seem to be the most verbally stressed, right? If we want to get as minute here, and I think we all do, as minute as to analyze Hamlet's state of mind based on the difficulty or lyricism of the sonic quality of his speeches. Anyway, the stage direction: Ghost beckons Hamlet. The ghost is still not talking, but is going, I've got a secret, come with me. The other guys are holding him back. Hamlet, logically, again, asks, what should be the fear? I do not set my life at a pin's fee, and for my soul, what can it do to that, being a thing immortal as itself? In other words, well, okay, even if it's the devil himself, right, disguised as my dad, the worst he can do is kill me. Whatever, because I don't care if I die. And even if it is the devil himself, he couldn't bring me to hell, because I would have to do something bad, right? Those are the rules. All he could do is kill me, and if he kills me, I'll go to heaven. I would have to do something. I would have to commit a sin. I would have to do something bad for it to drag me to hell. Even if it's the devil himself, he can't do that because the devil can't break the rules. So Hamlet, at this early stage in the play, still, though he has absolutely no use for the unweeded garden of this world, he still, perhaps paradoxically, appears to have total faith in the rules. As implied by his foul deeds will rise, though all the earth overwhelm them to men's eyes at the end of 1.2. This world sucks and is pointless, but ultimately God's justice and God's rules have logical and fair dominion over everything. Horatio responds, what if it tempt you toward the flood, my lord, or to the dreadful summit of the cliff that beetles over his base into the sea, and there assume some other horrible form which might deprive your sovereignty of reason and draw you into madness? Think of it. The very place puts toys of desperation without more motive into every brain that looks so many fathoms to the sea and hears it roar beneath. In other words, well, hang on. What if it... stay with me here. What if that's the devil disguised as your dad, and he beckons you to the edge of a cliff, and then turns into something horrible and scary, so scary in fact that it drives you insane and you jump off the cliff to get away from it? Then you are committing a sin. You're committing suicide, and then it can bring you to hell. Now this begs the question, well, if you commit suicide when you're insane, is it still a sin? This question will become important much, much later in the play after some other stuff happens. So a bit of foreshadowing by Horatio there. And also, I just love that line. The very place puts toys of desperation without more motive into every brain that looks so many fathoms to the sea and hears it roar beneath. Horatio there is referencing one of my favorite little weird-ass things about the human mind, namely the fact that whenever you're standing on the edge of something tall, suddenly there's this little voice in your head that's like, dude, you should jump. Wouldn't it be messed up if you jump right now? Where's that voice coming from? No, seriously, do it. I'm getting away from the edge of this cliff, right? That voice in your brain is not serious, toys of desperation, right? It's not real desperation. Like a toy is something that's not real. A toy horse or whatever is not a real horse. A toy gun is not a real gun. It's not real desperation. Your mind's not really telling you to kill yourself. It's just toys of desperation. Dude, maybe you should jump, just as a joke. Why does the human mind do that? Just another interesting question this play raises in a seemingly throwaway line. Okay, Hamlet breaks away from the other guy's grip, runs after his dad's ghost. Marcellus famously observes, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. Horatio responds, heaven will direct it. Marcellus disagrees, nay, let's follow him. So the exchange that follows the famous something is rotten in the state of Denmark, meaning, I suppose, this is picking up on what those guys were talking about in the first scene. If the dead king's ghost is back floating around, something must be sick in the body politic, or the heart of the state. There must be some sort of cancer in the body politic that this is a bad omen of. Horatio says, well, it's up to God. God's going to do whatever God's going to do. Heaven will direct it. Marcellus disagrees. Nay, let's follow him. We care about Prince Hamlet. We shouldn't just stand here and let God take care of it. Maybe this is a question of helping those who help themselves here. Okay, we're all anxious to find out what the ghost finally has to say. We'll find that out finally in the very next scene, Act 1, Scene 5. See you then.